everyone, this is Gabrielle Johnson with Best Life Dog Services, and today I want to talk to you about stress. So stress here just means arousal. So we're going to use stress here to mean escalation. The underlying emotion to the stress can be frustration, excitement, anxiety, fear. So it all just kind of speaks to this kind of physiological response in the body. To give us a bit of a shared language, I want to talk about stress in terms of green, yellow, and red. So green is going to be productive stress. That's the stress that allows us to hold our bodies upright. You're watching this video, you're processing information. If you're communicating with someone, you're taking in what they're saying and their nonverbal signals, and there's a lot going on, and we're holding our bodies upright. We might be alert and learning, we might be relaxed, but it's a productive level of stress that allows us to process information, to learn, to remember. So that's happening in the green zone. So that's where we want our dogs to be when they are learning. It's where we want our dogs to be a majority of the time. That's the healthiest place to be, mentally, physically, emotionally. In the yellow zone, we're seeing that stress has hit a maladaptive level. So the stress is now interfering with that ability to process information, the ability to learn, the ability to remember, the ability to make thoughtful decisions, non-impulsive, non-emotional decisions. That ability is being hampered, as well as some other things. So we'll take a look at that. And then there's the red zone. And red zone is when maladaptive falls short, right? So this is now management failure level stress. We are in fight, flight, or freeze. We are having a very hard time. No learning can take place in this state of mind, and the dog really just needs our help. We need to minimize the damage and get out of that situation as quickly as possible. In the green zone, we're primarily looking at the prefrontal cortex. So inside the dog's brain, when we're in the prefrontal cortex, when we're in the green zone, the prefrontal cortex is fully engaged. I'm going to simplify brains a little bit here, but the prefrontal cortex allows for processing of information. So verbal cues, your dog's name, your recall whistle, the smells on the ground, the food that you've scattered, the ability to learn, remember, that's all taking place prefrontal cortex, green zone. So picture in the green zone, the prefrontal cortex is fully engaged, and the limbic system is just sitting back. So the limbic system is this hind part of the brain that handles things like emotions and impulses and survival. Its main thing is survival. So the limbic system handles your fight or flight response. Brainstem also back here handles that freeze response. And so this is the survival part of the brain, and it is just sitting back, waiting to jump into action if it needs to, and it does it really fast. It does it faster than your prefrontal cortex can respond. So for example, if you see a coiled up rope in the leaves and it startles you, your limbic system is going to go, that's kind of like something that is scary to us, so we are going to flood the body with adrenaline and we're going to jump back. And milliseconds later, your prefrontal cortex kicks in. It sends some cortisol to squash that adrenaline, and it says, no, more thoughtful part of the brain, that looks like a snake, but it's not a snake, and we're safe. So depending on how stressful almost seeing a snake is to us and how long we thought it was a snake, can determine how long it takes us to come back down, whether we went to yellow or red, and how long it takes us to come back down into green. So in the yellow zone, what we see is that the limbic system starts to kick in a little bit. And as it starts to kick in, the prefrontal cortex goes offline a little bit. So in green zone, we had the prefrontal cortex, ideal place for learning, and then we had the limbic system just sitting back. Now the limbic system's a little bit more engaged. Arousal's a little higher. Arousal is now getting in the way of learning. This is now maladaptive stress. The dog is coping, but it's not an ideal situation. So what we want to see is that a dog can experience this moderate stress, cope with it, self-regulate, bring themselves back down, and that can happen quickly. So a lot of times when we're dealing with a dog when we're helping a dog who's having a really hard time, what we see often is that their threshold for stress is lower than it needs to be to handle real life situations, right? So my dog needs to be able to walk stress-free through the neighborhood with dogs at least 6 feet away, and my threshold's more like 20 feet. And so we say, okay, so the threshold is lower than where it would need to be for our day-to-day activities. So that's where our work comes in, when we start changing emotion and teaching alternative behaviors. It's a different conversation. And the resilience. When you see that dog and it's too close, does it ruin your walk? Does it ruin your day? Does it ruin your week? So we want to see that a dog can experience some of that stress and then come right back down. And so we want to be able to notice when our dog is in the yellow zone and say, I know that in this space, you are not processing information as well as you could normally. Your stress hormones are a little higher than I would like them to be. Then you can thoughtfully make some good decisions maybe. And we want to recognize, are you calming yourself back down? Or are you getting more riled up? We want to intervene here in the yellow zone if our dog needs our help. This is how we prevent dog fights and bites and and over threshold responses on leash, barking and lunging, is we notice before it gets to that point. All of those behaviors are taking place in that red zone. So we want to notice in the yellow zone and help our dog get back into the green. So that might mean taking space. It might mean helping them engage in some self-soothing behaviors like sniffing or licking are both great self-soothing behaviors. Licking releases endorphins and helps the dog calm down. Sniffing lowers the heart rate, lowers the pulse, right? We're lowering arousal. Eating also typically lowers arousal, and food creates positive associations, when it comes after something scary. So we can negate some of that negative impact with that food as well. Or does the dog have it? Are they fine, right? Do they get spooked by something and then they calm themselves down? You see them engage in some displacement behaviors such as sniffing or licking with the intention of calming themselves down, in which case they might not need your help. But it's our job to be aware of situations where our dogs might need that help and to be able to read that. So red zone, limbic system is fully engaged. We are in fight, flight, or freeze. It's worth understanding that fight, flight, and freeze, they're all coming from the same place. They're all survival reactions. And we tend to have kind of this moral connotation around it. So like with humans, we sometimes shame the freeze or flight response, and kind of want to all think we would go towards that fight response in a situation that called for it. We see that as like brave. And with dogs, the opposite, right? We abhor the idea of a dog biting someone. It's very, very emotional when we have a dog who might engage in that behavior, and we put much less judgment on that flight or fear or flight or freeze response, to the point that sometimes we disregard that response in dogs more readily. And so it's really important to understand that we should take all of those responses just as seriously when considering the dog's well-being, and that although certainly the fight response carries greater risk a lot of the time when we're talking about physical risk, but understanding that that a dog that's choosing fight, their brain is not actually choosing, right? Their brain is saying, I think this is probably the best way we can survive this, and that decision is based on genetics and early environment and their whole learning history and so many different factors. So we've got this shared language, green, yellow, red, stress, and we understand kind of how the brain is working, right? So prefrontal cortex gives you that learning brain. Limbic system gives you that emotional brain, that panic brain. We want to be able to tell when we're starting to shift towards the panicky brain or the more aroused brain, the less thoughtful brain, so that we can intervene and set our dog up for success. So how do we tell? How do we tell if we're in the green, yellow, or red? One way is body language. So body language in the green zone might be resting or relaxed, right? Not to be confused with shut down, not to be confused with learned helplessness, but truly relaxed. We want to see soft bodies, bright eyes. This could be anything from a dog that's, kind of just resting to kind of alert and in a training session, maybe focused, right? Probably a relaxed mouth, so open or a lightly closed jaw. We want to see, if it's an active dog, social engagement. We want to see bouncy, wiggly, inefficient movements. In the yellow zone, we're going to see a lot of that turn to maybe slower movements. We still might have curves, but the dog is curving away, moving away, looking away, a lot of appeasement signals, a lot of avoidance. We're going to see calming signals appear here, lip licking, yawning. We're going to see whale eye, panting. As we start to get higher in yellow, right, we're getting physiological responses to stress now. So panting from an elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, the hackles standing up on the back. Again, this can be excitement. You could have a really excited, hyper aroused dog who's, now jumping all over the company and can't hear you when you say fluffy sit, because this part of the brain isn't working very well. And they're really, really excited. And they might not go into the red zone, but they might really need some help coming down out of that yellow zone. Because the behavior that they're engaging in, the jumping and the barking and the being excited, is going to continue to arouse them, compared to the dog that gets really excited and then goes and grabs their toy and does a couple laps, or runs themselves to their bed, or goes and drinks all the water that they have had access to all day long, but they drink the whole thing down. And those are better outlets for their arousal. Again, licking and sniffing are great, really common ones, because they help the dog calm down. So again, we want to look at these signs in yellow and say, do you need my help? Or do you have this? Aside from body language, and then red zone body language, right? We're going to look for those calming signals disappear. We see dogs freeze, get very still, stiff, frozen, the tail stops moving. Remember, a wagging tail doesn't mean happy. There are a lot of different tail wags, but when that tail gets really stiff, when the whole body gets really stiff, still, hard stares, tight closed mouth, certainly any growling, barking that's saying stay back, lunging, snapping, biting. These are red zone, fleeing, and complete shutdown, freeze. So we can also watch what happens to the digestive system. So as stress levels increase, the digestive system tends to go offline a bit. That's because you don't need to eat a pizza while you're being chased by a lion. So, the other parts of the body, as the stress levels increase, like the cardiovascular system, need more of that energy, and so the digestive system goes offline a little bit. Long-term stress too, we also see things like the immune system start to go offline. That's why chronic stress can be so detrimental to so this is all mental health, is physical health, is emotional health. So we can watch for changes in digestion. Maybe in the green zone, that your dog loves all food and takes it readily with a gentle mouth. And in the yellow zone, your dog takes food really hard, or they only take high value food, or they pick up food and then drop it, or if you scatter food on the ground, they only find some of it. Part of that has to do with that digestive system going offline. Part of that has to do with processing not happening as well. So we can look for those changes. Some dogs are going to lose their appetite very early, some much later on. So it's important to have a lot of ways that we can check in. So body language, digestion, how well are they responding to known cues? If I say fluffy and they say what, and it takes 2 seconds usually in green, and it takes 5 seconds in a different situation, I know that we're maybe not processing as quickly. If the sit takes a little longer. That's why when you ask your dog for a cue, you don't need to ask them repeatedly. Not only does it weaken your cue, but if they can't respond, that's information. And the information doesn't tell us try harder, ask again, ask louder. It says, well, what is competing with me right now? And is it something that I need to attend to? Is this the case of a distracted puppy? Is this a dog trying to check out their environment to see if they feel safe? What's going on here? Can your dog play? And this doesn't necessarily mean things like kind of repetitive things like fetch, or that sort of thing. A dog could be stressed out and maybe still do, we've all seen the kind of ball obsessed dog, right? But can your dog play with you? Can you guys engage in some play? That's a great way to check to see if our stress levels are low. The play will stop if the stress levels get too high. So we have a lot of ways to check there are more than that, but this video is already getting pretty long. But there are a lot of ways to check our dog's temperature, so to speak, and say, are we green, yellow, red? So what if we find ourselves in yellow and we're trying to prevent a red reaction? Well, I mentioned a couple of the things. Sniffing and licking are both great. So I love a snuffle mat and a licky mat for inside. Nature's snuffle mat, of course, is scattering, doing a scatter feed in the grass. You would be amazed what a scatter feed can do to help a dog if you catch them before they're hugely stressed. You can also use that to orient them away from something that you're trying to get them not to stare at while it goes by. Pattern games can be a great way to bring your dog back down to the green zone. Just eating in general can really, really help if your dog is able to take food. And so we have lots of options. Again, the trick is to catch it early on. Now, some dogs, certainly, you might be saying, I don't get a middle. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens because for a few reasons. So the first, and probably the one I see most often, is that the dog is startled. So you startle the dog awake, they go straight from green to red. There is no in between. So certainly we can see a dog go straight from green to red when they are surprised by a trigger. Again, you think of that response. Maybe if you're really scared of snakes and you see a coiled rope, you are 600 feet away before you can even recognize that it's not a snake. Often, if compulsion training has been used, so punishment that's been used to punish communication like growls, barks, snarls, when that language is punished, we see it less often. So if the dog growls and we yell at them or shake a penny can or that sort of thing, the dog learns not to growl. The emotion doesn't go away. And so what we've done is taken, I think it's Dr. Ian Dunbar that says, we've removed the ticker from the time bomb. Sometimes dogs will have the warning signs will have been punished out of them, and that can be very dangerous. But most often, I want to say most often when people say my dog doesn't give any warning, it's just that they don't know what to look for. So they're missing the dog turning away, the whale eye. They're missing the displacement behaviors. The body language is getting misread, right? The dog lays on their side very still, lifts up a leg, mouth closed, whale eye, ears back, but the person thinks they want a belly rub, right? And so this dog is saying, please give me space, and the person is touching it. It's just this miscommunication is probably what I see most often. And then probably second most often, there's no warning because the trigger is just such that when the dog is exposed, they go straight over. The other thing we have to watch for is trigger stacking. So trigger stacking occurs when it's just one stressor after another, and this can happen over days, it can happen over hours, it can happen over years. This is like when you wake up late and then hit traffic on the way to work and then spill your coffee everywhere and your boss is mad at you and you get in a fight with your partner and your dog throws up on the bed, and by the time you have burned dinner and then you spill your drink, you just have a complete come apart. And it's not because you can't handle spilling a drink by itself, but it's just been one thing after another, and now you've been tipped over. So that can happen to your dog too. That's why it's so important with management to manage all the stressors. It's one of the reasons. So this is, your dog's been sitting guard at the window all day long, barking and growling at every person that goes past, and it was garbage day and you got an Amazon delivery, and mom came back later than expected from work, and she mismeasured my dinner, and there were like 3 kibbles missing, and maybe there's the beginning of an ear infection or some arthritis or something like that we're not even aware of. And so by the time we go out for our walk that evening and that little kid is just screaming at you and runs forward, maybe your dog has a reaction that you wouldn't expect. Maybe they bark at the little kid and you're like, I've never seen her, bark at a child before. And that can be really scary. And so what we would want to look for, maybe before that is say, oh, do kids make you nervous? Do I see things like moving away, lip licking, that sort of thing? And maybe that's a bad example because dogs and kids could be a whole video, several videos on their own. And so I don't want to give flippant examples of dogs and children. But my point is that we can see stress responses that we wouldn't have seen normally. We can see a stress response to triggers that normally wouldn't provoke such a response when we've been stacking up triggers all day or longer. So That's my really long video on stress levels um, and how they impact your dog's ability to learn. So this really goes back to your dog is not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. Being able to tell when our dog is having a hard time, being able to help them have a less hard time and set them up for success is a key part of living cooperatively with our dogs and making sure that everyone's needs are met. And I love this stuff because it also tells us, something about ourselves, right? I know that when if I overwork myself and don't make sure to balance my needs, that I will start losing keys. I misplace all the keys and I lock myself out of things. It's a great like double whammy. So stress levels affect the way we process and think and remember too. And so a reminder to be gentle with yourselves, and that training should be fun. You and your dog should be in the green zone when training. If you or your dog are in the yellow zone or the red zone while training, we need to reevaluate. So you and your dog do not need to be pushed through stressful situations. In the name of training, please remember that our management plan dictates that we avoid the stress until the dog can handle it. So learning takes place in the green zone. We need those stress levels low. We need to be able to feel safe. The dog needs to be able to be creative, to be able to problem solve, to be able to make choices. So we want to set them up to be successful and to stay in that green zone. So we set the environment that way, and then all the choices that they can make are correct, thoughtful choices. We reinforce the heck out of those, and we're well on our way. So wow, if you stayed here for that whole video, you must really be into dog stuff. So I I hope you have a really good day, friends, and let me know what you think. Did you learn anything about how your dog perceives the world or how they experience the world? Did this click any buttons? I'm mixing my metaphors for you. I hope it did. I hope that this was helpful. Have a great night.